"You're late, Mr. Kessler. Again." That voice. That self-important nasal drawl that made my ears itch. I turned from my truck and faced her, Delores Chandler, president of the Maple Ridge HOA and the bane of my existence since the day I moved in. She stood on the sidewalk in her sun hat and floral blazer like some kind of suburban military general, clipboard in hand, lips pursed so tight they might split. "I paid last month's dues on time," I said, grabbing my toolbox from the bed. "And the month before that." "You want to explain how I suddenly owe over $1,200? Delores narrowed her eyes behind her oversized sunglasses. "You've been underpaying," she said. "We've recalculated your retroactive assessments. You're lucky we haven't added late fees." That hit me like a slap. "Retroactive what?" "It's all outlined in the latest amendment packet. Page 14, she said, tapping her clipboard. I laughed, sharp and bitter. "You people keep slipping in new rules like you're running a Vegas casino. You think I don't read them?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Then you should know better. Any further non-compliance will result in a lien." I nearly dropped my wrench. "A lien? Over made-up fees?" Delores turned on her heel and walked away like she'd just served a royal decree. I stood there, sweaty, furious, and suddenly very, very suspicious. I wasn't the kind of guy who backed down from a fight. I served 6 years in the Marines, ran my own HVAC business, and spent every spare second with my daughter, Kenzie. I didn't have time for HOA games, but this wasn't a game anymore. Something stunk. That night, after Kenzie fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a stack of paper 2 inches thick, every HOA notice, invoice, and newsletter from the past year. I sorted them by date, highlighted every dues amount, and compared them to my payment receipts. What I found made my pulse spike. In March, the dues were listed as $175. In April, they jumped to $200. Then in May, back down to $175. June, $225, no notices, no explanations. They'd been fluctuating dues without telling anyone and charging retroactively. I grabbed my laptop, pulled up the HOA bylaws, and scrolled until I found the part about dues increases. Any change in dues must be approved by a 2/3 vote of all homeowners at a public meeting with at least 30 days' notice. There hadn't been any meetings. I would have known Delores always made a spectacle of them. I printed everything, made copies, and started a spreadsheet. I wasn't just going to prove this was shady. I was going to prove it was criminal. The next morning, I walked into the management office, a cramped room inside the clubhouse that always smelled like burnt coffee and fake lemon cleaner. Delores was perched behind the desk, tapping at her computer like she was hacking the Pentagon. "I want the full financial records for the HOA dues going back 18 months, I said, placing a written request on the desk. She didn't even look up. "You're not entitled to those." "Actually, I am. Civil Code 5200. Members have the right to inspect financial documents." "You've got 3 business days. Now she looked up. "Is this some kind of intimidation tactic, Mr. Kessler?" "No, Delores, it's a courtesy, because next time I'll bring a lawyer." She glared at me like she wanted to melt my face. "Fine. You'll get what you're allowed to see." 3 days later, I got a manila envelope stuffed with 20 pages of half-redacted garbage. No line item breakdown, no board signatures, no vote records. Just vague totals and something called miscellaneous administrative costs, which totaled over $12,000 in the past year. I took one look and said out loud, "They're laundering the damn dues." That night, I made 2 phone calls. One to a friend of mine named Marcus, a CPA who owed me a favor. The other to a paralegal I met after helping her fix her /C during a heat wave last summer. She was sharp, and she knew HOA law better than most attorneys. By the end of the week, I had a full audit of the financials. Marcus had used old public records, tax filings, and the partial documents Delores gave me to piece it together. "Danny," he said when he called, "they're inflating the dues, then funneling the excess into a maintenance contract with a shell company. That company doesn't exist, or rather it's registered to a P.O. box, under the name Delores Chandler. I sat in stunned silence. You're telling me she's been stealing from all of us? More than that. If the total's over $9,000 and it wasn't authorized or disclosed, that's grand theft. I looked at my spreadsheet again. The numbers didn't lie. Delores had been siphoning off money for over a year, hidden behind fake maintenance invoices and unexplained fees. And no one noticed because she'd buried the changes in a sea of fine print and fake amendments. I wasn't going to just expose her. I was going to bury her in her own paperwork. Sunday morning, I called a neighborhood meeting. Not an official HOA meeting, just a gathering at the park with donuts and coffee. I printed copies of my findings, laid them out on folding tables, and waited. By 10 o'clock, over 30 neighbors showed up. A few were skeptical. Most were pissed. One woman, a nurse named Tanya, shouted, "I've been paying an extra $50 a month while she drives a new Lexus." I stood on the bench and held up the fake invoice Delores had submitted for irrigation system replacements. "That system hasn't been replaced since I moved in," I said. "I checked, and the contractor she supposedly paid doesn't exist." People didn't just get mad, they got organized. We signed a petition demanding a special audit by the county. We filed formal complaints with the Department of Consumer Affairs. And we demanded an emergency board meeting to vote on removing Delores. That's when things got ugly. 2 days later, I came home to find a bright red notice taped to my door. Final warning. Property in violation, unauthorized gathering of residents. Fine, $500. I pulled it down and laughed. She really thinks this is gonna scare me. But then I noticed something else. My mailbox had been pried open. And inside, my HOA dues check for the month had been torn in half. I wasn't scared. I was done playing nice. She wanted war. She just got it. I showed the torn check to Officer Ramirez the next morning. He stood on my porch, thumb hooked in his duty belt, squinting at the ripped paper like it might start talking. "You sure you didn't tear this yourself?" I stepped back and pointed to the mailbox. "You see those pry marks?" "That wasn't raccoons." He bent down, ran a finger along the bent metal. "You got a camera, front door, side of the garage, and one on the mailbox post," I said. "Pulled the footage already." He followed me inside, and I played the clip on my laptop. The video showed a man in a hoodie, face hidden, walk up at 2:15 in the morning and wedge something into the mailbox. 2 minutes later, he yanked it open with a crowbar, rifled through, and left with a handful of mail. Ramirez leaned in. He's not a pro. Sloppy grip, no gloves. You get a look at his license plate. Too dark, but I enhanced the frame. Check this. I paused the video and zoomed on the lower right corner, a reflection in the neighbor's window. It showed a silver pickup with a contractor's logo on the door. It wasn't clear, but it was enough to recognize the outline of the Maple Ridge landscaping insignia. Ramirez gave a low whistle. "That's the company contracted by the HOA?" "Yup. The same company Delores used to funnel thousands through." He straightened up. "You think she told someone to do this?" "I think she's gotten sloppy and desperate." He took a deep breath, then opened his notepad. "You want to file an official complaint," I nodded, "and I want to report suspected financial fraud by the HOA leadership. I've got documents, audit results, and a list of residents ready to testify." Ramirez wrote quickly, his pen scratching like it was digging through wood. "All right, I'll file this today. You may want to talk to a detective in financial crimes. If it's as big as you say, it's out of my hands." That afternoon, I met with Detective Leila Morno at the precinct. She was no nonsense, wore a navy blazer over a plain tee, and had a voice like gravel and caffeine. She flipped through my packet in silence for 15 minutes. Then she set it down and folded her hands. "You're telling me the HOA president created a fake landscaping company, funneled homeowner dues into it, and used the money for personal expenses?" "Not telling," I said. "Showing?" She nodded toward the spreadsheet. "This is solid. You got timestamps, vendor IDs, and cross-reference tax filings." "Who did the digging?" "A CPA friend. He's willing to testify." She leaned back. "All right. I'll need a formal statement and a signed affidavit, and I'll need to speak to other homeowners. You think they'll talk? They're already organizing. They want her gone. Morneau pulled out a recorder, clicked it on, and gestured for me to start from the beginning. By the time I got home, my phone had over a dozen messages. One was from Marcus, saying he found something big. I called him back while pulling into the driveway. "Danny," he said, voice low, "you know that P.O. box Delores used to register the fake company?" "Yeah." She listed a secondary contact. Her nephew, name's Travis Chandler, lives 2 towns over. Guess what else he registered 3 weeks ago? He didn't. He did. A second shell business, same structure, same bank, but this time it's for community security consulting. My stomach dropped. She's setting up another drain. She's already billed the HOA $6,000 under the new name. It hit the books last week. I hung up and marched straight to my garage. I had one more card to play. A few years ago, I helped a guy named Ron fix his central air during a 4th of July heat wave. He was a quiet guy, lived alone, kept to himself. Turned out he was a retired forensic accountant for the state attorney general's office. I hadn't talked to him in months, but I figured now was a good time to reconnect. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Kessler, still keeping cool? Trying. You up for a puzzle?" "Might involve some light corruption," he chuckled. "I'm listening." I gave him the rundown, sent over the files, and asked if he could take a look. He didn't hesitate. By Thursday, he called me back with a voice so sharp it could have cut drywall. "She's cooked the books in more ways than I thought possible. She's using HOA funds to pay off personal credit cards, hiding it under vendor reimbursements. And get this, she's been charging monthly consulting fees to the HOA board under board member names. But those board members had no idea. "How do you know?" I called them. I stared at the wall. "You serious?" "Dead serious. One of them's a retired firefighter, another's a school teacher." They thought they were volunteering for community cleanups, not signing off on wire transfers. I didn't waste a second. I sent everything to Detective Morneau. By Friday morning, she called me back. "We've got enough to open a formal investigation. If this pans out, we're looking at felony grand theft, wire fraud, and falsifying financial records. What happens next? We'll coordinate with the district attorney, but first, we'll need to execute a search warrant. We already have probable cause." By that evening, 2 cruisers and an unmarked sedan rolled into the neighborhood. I watched from my porch as Delores was escorted from her house in handcuffs, her face pale and stunned. Neighbors gathered in clusters on their lawns, whispering and pointing. One guy clapped. Tanya, the nurse, let out a loud laugh and said, "Guess we're getting our dues back." I didn't move. I just watched. As they read her the charges, I caught a glimpse of her expression. Not angry, not scared, just hollow. The next board meeting was packed. This time, it wasn't donuts and coffee in the park. It was in the community center, under fluorescent lights, with folding chairs filled to the walls. Detective Morneau stood at the front, flanked by 2 representatives from the district attorney's office. They laid out the charges in plain language: embezzlement, fraud, unlawful use of public funds. Then they gave the floor to me. I stepped up, heart pounding. Not from nerves, from relief. "I didn't ask for this fight," I said, "but once I saw something wrong, I couldn't look away. What Delores did wasn't just theft, it was betrayal. We trusted her to manage our community. Instead, she used it like her personal ATM." I held up a new proposal. "This is a motion to dissolve the current HOA board and hold new elections, supervised by an independent monitor. Every position will be voted on openly. No more closed-door policies, no more fine print." There was no debate, no hesitation. The vote was unanimous. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed. The new board, made up of people who actually lived here and cared, eliminated bogus fees, renegotiated legitimate contracts, and refunded over $18,000 to homeowners. Delores eventually took a plea deal. 5 years probation, repayment of stolen funds, and a permanent ban from holding fiduciary roles in any organization. The HOA was no longer a punchline. It was a community again, and me. I went back to fixing air conditioners and helping Kenzie with her science projects. But every time I walked past the old HOA office, I allowed myself a quiet smile. This neighborhood belonged to all of us now, and no one, not even a clipboard queen in a sun hat, was going to take it from us again. The new board's first official act was transparency. They invited every homeowner to a town hall in the gymnasium of the local high school neutral ground, away from the poisoned air of the old community center. No folding chairs this time. These were metal bleachers, packed with people who hadn't attended a single HOA meeting in years. But the fallout from Dolores's downfall had awakened something in the neighborhood: vigilance. I sat near the front. Not because I was running for anything I wasn't. I'd made it crystal clear I had no interest in joining the board, but they asked me to attend as a guest speaker. One of the newly appointed members, a former military logistics officer named Reggie, stepped up to the podium first. "We've appointed a temporary oversight committee," Reggie said, voice calm but authoritative. "They'll be working alongside the county auditor's office to ensure everything's above board, and we've opened the books, all of them, including Dolores's hard drives, which were seized during the investigation." That immediately silenced the murmurs in the back. He nodded in my direction. Danny Kessler was the first to spot the inconsistencies, but what we've found since goes even deeper, and he's agreed to help us walk through it. I stood, walked to the microphone, and looked out at rows of skeptical, waiting eyes. "There's something you all need to see," I said. Reggie wheeled out a projector cart with an old-school flip top. I plugged in a flash drive and pulled up the spreadsheet we'd been working on for weeks with the auditors. "This," I said, clicking to the first page, "is every transaction flagged as suspicious by the oversight team. Over 80 entries, but they're not just random, they follow a pattern." The screen lit up with a cluster of dates and amounts. I zoomed in on one, a consulting fee from a company called Briarwood Resource Group. "You see this name right here? This company billed the HOA 9 times in 4 months. Over $24,000, except it doesn't exist. No office, no employees, no services rendered. It's a front." I advanced to the next slide. It showed a scanned copy of a check signed by Delores, backdated and routed through a local credit union. She authorized payments to this group, then redirected the funds to a personal investment account registered under her niece's name. That account, by the way, was used to make down payments on 2 properties, one of them in Arizona. A man in the third row stood up. "Wait. You're saying she used our HOA dues to buy real estate?" "Not just yours," I said. "Everyone's. Even the elderly couple on Sycamore Lane who paid their dues through a money order and never received a single notice about the increases. We found 22 similar cases. People who had no idea they were being overcharged." Reggie stepped in again. "The county has now confirmed this wasn't just fraud, it qualifies as racketeering." You could have heard a pin drop. "Delores didn't act alone," he continued. "We've uncovered forged signatures from previous board members, including one who passed away last year. She used his name to authorize retroactive amendments. That's identity fraud, and it's now part of the state's case." An older woman near the aisle covered her mouth. Her husband just sat there, arms crossed, jaw clenched. I motioned to the next slide. And it gets worse. This one showed a scanned invoice labeled Security Patrol Enhancement. It was invoice number 32. This charge went through last October. It was listed as a payment for night patrols around the west end of the community. But again, no contract, no personnel. And then we found this. I clicked to a frame from a security cam video, one that had been submitted anonymously to the new board 3 days prior. It showed a man in a janitor's uniform entering the HOA office after hours with a key. He left 20 minutes later with 3 bankers' boxes. We cross-referenced the time of this footage with the building security logs. The man wasn't on any shift roster. And the key he used was one of 3 master keys issued only to board members. Reggie took over. We now believe Delores hired a former maintenance worker to remove and destroy archived financial records the week before her arrest. That's obstruction of justice. Someone shouted from the back. Wasn't anyone watching her? Another board member, a younger woman named Priya, stepped up. We hadn't yet frozen her access. We didn't think she'd risk tampering with physical files. That was our mistake. But we've since recovered those records from a storage unit she failed to properly erase. I watched as the crowd began to shift, not with anger this time, but with realization. This wasn't just a power-hungry woman manipulating dues. This was a full-blown criminal enterprise run under the guise of community governance. Later that week, I was called in to give a formal deposition at the district courthouse. The assistant district attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Maureen Laskin, met me in a conference room with a case file the size of a phone book. "Mr. Kessler, you've been instrumental in this case," she said, flipping to the timeline I'd created. "But we're about to file additional charges based on your latest findings, including mail fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit racketeering." I leaned forward. "Do we have enough to go after her family too? The nephew, the niece, the guy who broke into my mailbox?" She nodded. "We've already issued warrants. The nephew's phone records led us to a burner that was used to contact the maintenance guy, and the niece's bank statements link her directly to the fake consulting firms." I exhaled slowly. "Good. Because this neighborhood's been through hell over this. We're also preparing a civil forfeiture case," she added. "If we win, we'll recover the properties she purchased and use the proceeds to reimburse affected homeowners." That part hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on chasing the fraud, I hadn't thought about the restitution. People might actually get their lives back. That mattered more than any courtroom victory. On my way out of the courthouse, I passed a man in a gray suit standing with his arms folded. He caught my eye and walked over. "You're Kessler?" he asked. "Yeah. Why?" He handed me a business card. "I'm with the State Attorney General's office. We've been monitoring HOA-related fraud across the region. Yours might be the case that blows the lid off the whole thing. We'd like your permission to use your findings in a broader investigation." I stared at the card. "You're telling me this isn't isolated?" "Far from it. But you're the first to get hard evidence and force a criminal referral." "That's rare." I thought about all the people who'd been fined, harassed, and bullied by HOAs that operated like private governments. Maybe this was bigger than Maple Ridge. "Use whatever you need," I said. "Just make sure they don't come back." Back in the neighborhood, things were quieter now. Not perfect, there were still disputes, still disagreements, but people were talking again. Not yelling through notices or passive-aggressive lawn signs. Actually talking. One evening, I stepped out to get the mail now in a tamper-proof box and saw Reggie walking his dog. He waved me down. "Hey," he said. "We've been thinking about setting up a community advisory committee, not official board business, just a group of residents keeping an eye on things. No authority, just accountability." I nodded. "Sounds smart." "You in?" I hesitated. "I'll come to the first one." "But I'm not leading anything," he grinned. "Didn't think you would, but people trust you now." That part sat heavy on my shoulders. I never wanted to be a symbol, I just didn't want to be pushed around. As I walked back inside, I caught a glimpse of the old HOA sign, faded, cracked, and half covered by ivy. The new board had voted to remove it. They said it didn't represent who the community was anymore, and they were right. This wasn't the neighborhood I moved into, it was better. Because this time, we were watching. The new advisory committee held its first meeting in a borrowed room above the local library. No fanfare, no banners, just a dry erase board, a carafe of lukewarm coffee, and a dozen folding chairs occupied by people who'd had enough of being steamrolled. There were contractors, nurses, a substitute teacher, a retired army medic, and even the guy who ran the bakery near the freeway. No one wore suits and no one brought a clipboard. Reggie opened the discussion by jotting a single word on the board: resilience. "We're not here to relive what happened," he said. We're here to make sure it never happens again. That includes sniffing out any leftover rot. I raised a hand. There's still one thing that doesn't sit right. The security invoices. We found 9 fabricated ones, but there were 12 total. What happened to the last 3? Reggie turned to Priya, who had been quietly reviewing her notes. They were paid through a separate account, she said. One we didn't know existed. That got everyone's attention. She pulled out a folder and passed copies down the row. We obtained the transaction logs from the bank after a subpoena was approved. This account wasn't listed in the official HOA budget. It was opened shortly after Delores' re-election 2 years ago. Every month, a slice of the dues was funneled into it under a payment labeled contingency. Slush fund, muttered the bakery owner. Priya nodded. And it gets worse. We traced a transfer from that account to a private security firm in another county, real company, real personnel. But the contract, they were paid under authorized surveillance. Surveillance? I leaned forward. On what? The neighborhood? She opened another folder and slid out a glossy, full-color brochure. McLean Asset Protection. They specialize in discrete residential observation. They were contracted to conduct pattern analysis on select residents in Maple Ridge. Reggie stared at her. Wait, they were spying on us. They were observing specific homes, she confirmed. They submitted reports monthly. We only found out because one operative included photos with GPS metadata still intact. 4 of the homes they watched belonged to residents who'd filed complaints about the dues. A woman at the back stood slowly. Her voice was low, strained. My husband filed a complaint last year. I came home once and found a parked van across the street. I thought it was a utility crew. It wasn't, Priya said. We recovered their internal logs. Your address was one of the sites. The room went dead silent. I pushed my chair back. That's not just fraud anymore. That's illegal surveillance. Wiretapping laws. Fourth Amendment violations. Has the DA seen this? They've been informed, Priya said. But they need more to pursue charges against the firm. The real target is the person who authorized the contract. Reggie folded his arms. Delores didn't sign that one. She didn't have to. Her second in command did, Gregory Harlan. I hadn't heard that name before. Who's that? He was the treasurer for less than 6 months, Priya said. Resigned 2 weeks after the contract was executed, moved out of state. I stood up. Then we find him. Reggie looked at me. And do what? Knock on his door with a flashlight? We don't have to. If he signed a contract like that, he left a trail. We formed a subcommittee that night, just 3 of us, including me. Our goal, track down Harlan, figure out what he knew, and get the final piece of the puzzle. We split the tasks. I contacted the county recorder's office to request property transfer records. Priya reached out to a friend at the state licensing board. And the retired medic, George, used his background to dig through public employee databases. By the end of the week, we had an address. Gregory Harlan had relocated to a gated community north of Sacramento. He'd registered a new business under a different name, but the articles of incorporation listed him as sole operator. The nature of the business: neighborhood compliance consulting. I didn't know whether to laugh or put my fist through a wall. We turned the findings over to Detective Morneau, who had stayed in touch throughout the investigation. I met her at a coffee shop near the precinct, handed her the folder, and watched her flip through it while sipping black coffee like it was motor oil. He's running the same scam, I said. Different location, same setup. I don't know if he's working alone or with someone new, but he's using the same playbook. She didn't speak for a long time, just tapped her fingernail against the edge of the file. All right, she said finally. You've done your part. Now let me do mine. Within 2 days, Harlan was served with a subpoena. He lawyered up instantly, but it didn't help. The paper trail was airtight. Emails, bank transfers, and meeting minutes that showed he signed off on surveillance contracts without informing the board. Worse, he'd received a direct deposit from McLean Asset Protection the day after the contract was executed, a $5,000 consulting bonus. The DA moved quickly. Harlan was charged with conspiracy to commit unlawful surveillance, financial misconduct, and aiding grand theft via HOA fraud. The charges weren't as severe as Delores's, but they were enough to guarantee he'd never work in anything resembling governance again. The final nail came when Detective Morneau recovered a voice memo from Harlan's phone. It was poorly recorded, but clear enough. He was talking to Delores, discussing which residents were problematic and needed to be monitored for influence. The word influence was what stuck. They weren't just trying to silence complaints, they were trying to manipulate the outcome of community decisions by targeting outspoken homeowners. When that evidence was played in court, even the judge looked stunned. Delores's plea deal was revoked. The DA filed a motion for full prosecution on all counts, including the new charges of civil rights violations. The courtroom was packed the day her trial began. I testified on the second day. Not about the money, not about the fake companies, about the surveillance. I told them how my daughter had once asked why a strange man was sitting in a car across from our house for 2 hours. How neighbors had started whispering behind closed doors because they felt watched. How a community designed to feel safe had been turned into a pressure cooker of paranoia. Delores didn't look at me once. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 7 years in state prison, no possibility of early release. Harlan got 18 months in county jail and was barred from holding any administrative position for life. After the sentencing, the new board hosted a small gathering at the park. Not a celebration, more like a collective exhale. Kids played near the swings, someone grilled burgers, and for the first time in over a year, no one brought up dues or citations or surveillance vans. Reggie handed me a soda and nodded toward the crowd. "You did something rare," he said. "You didn't just fight back, you changed the rules." I sat on the picnic bench, watching Kenzie teach another kid how to climb the rope ladder. "I didn't want to change anything," I said. "I just wanted to stop them from changing us." He clinked his can against mine. "You did both." The Maple Ridge HOA was formally restructured 6 weeks later. The old bylaws were scrapped and replaced with a new charter written by residents, reviewed by legal counsel, and voted on in a public session. Every financial transaction was now logged in a public portal. Every meeting was recorded and archived. But the biggest change came in the form of a simple rule. Any homeowner could request a review of board actions by a randomly selected panel of fellow residents. No vote, no politics, just peer oversight. It didn't fix everything, but it meant no one could ever pull the same stunt again. I got a letter from the state attorney general's office a month after that. They were launching a regional task force to investigate HOA corruption. They asked if I'd be willing to consult. I said no at first. Then I thought about the surveillance contracts, the fake invoices, the mailbox, the broken trust. So I changed my answer. Because maybe somewhere out there, another guy's getting a red notice on his door and wondering how the hell it's legal. And maybe he needs someone in his corner. Someone who's seen what happens when the people running your neighborhood forget that it's not theirs to rule. It's yours to defend.